DLA Piper, who's a tax partner in the Baltimore office, and he's far better looking than Skip Kessler, that's in your program. Dan Lupian, who's a founder and developer with Palmer Development. Dan's going to talk to us a little bit about the projects he's got in the Scottsdale area. Paul Furman, also a principal and developer with Miramar Capital. Paul is a reform lawyer, so he saw the light and ran towards it. Steve and I saw the dark and ran towards that instead. And then the last person on my far right, Carlos Rodriguez Jr., who is co-founder of Driftwood Acquisitions and Development, also a developer. And so the little bit of the point of our panel is to really talk about many of the acquisition, development, transactional issues, and ultimate disposition that come up with real estate, particularly in development deals in opportunity zones. So our first point of discussion will be ideal property. Dan, substantial improvement, that's one of our tests. Ground up development and vacant properties, another test. But when you think about an ideal property from a substantial improvement standpoint, what comes to mind?
Ideally, it's raw land, undeveloped land, where you can not do as much as if you particularly buy an existing asset or a building. We feel like the litmus test to substantially improve is doubling the value of it. So with raw land, you can do that a lot easier than an existing building. You can there's a better timeline to do that. The issue with it though is with respect to entitlements and zoning and things like that. That creates some challenges with respect to hitting these timelines. But when you do the cost-benefit analysis, we believe that raw land is probably the easiest to substantially improve.
Okay. Anybody else on the panel? From Carlos, you look like you're ready to say something on this one.
We dabble a little bit in both. Our expertise is hospitality. We have over $2 billion of assets under management. We have a sister hospitality management company and our own acquisitions and development fund. So we focus on the acquisition side and value add deals and also the development side. And we've actually targeted both for our Opportunity Zone Fund as we've just started rolling it out, and we control two. And one's a ground up deal, hospitality in Florida, and the other one is an office conversion in Delaware, in Wilmington. And there's pros and cons to each. I mean, the development issues, obviously, it takes a lot longer time frame. We've incorporated EB5 in our structure for development for a long time. So our deal was an EB5 deal, and that's how it qualified also for an opportunity zone. And we're structuring it now as a ground lease to be able to take advantage of it. But for new deals, it takes a lot longer. And that's one of the advantages with the office conversion. It's a 12-month time frame that we have for our hotel. But we also find acquisition deals that you can double the basis, and maybe it has additional land play. So I think you just have to get creative, especially when a lot of people are targeting opportunity zones for just raw land, to be able to find value in those deals that might be overlooked as qualifying, and to see how you can make it qualifying. And we've seen cash flowing hotels that may not meet the substantial improvement, but it's a significant amount. And then there's another parcel where we can develop on it. So it's a little bit of a combination of everything to try to mitigate risk for the investors, deploy it in the time frames, and reach the yields that we want to achieve.
Are there any particular types of property, Carlos, that you would say you would want to shy away from, or not be involved with, or at least not want to do as an opportunity zone deal?
So I missed the first part of your question.
Are there any particular type of deals that you would want to shy away from and not be involved with, particularly from an opportunity zone standpoint?
I think, again, we talk about the structures and the benefits and all that's amazing, but it comes down to the fundamentals of the deal. And, for us, we are nationwide. We target everywhere for both acquisitions and development. But we've seen a lot of opportunities that are just no longer the right price for the asset because everyone thinks that it's this massive step up in value, and again, you have to kind of back it into that. So it's really on the micro level, I would say, of what the value is for the asset, rather than a macro. I don't want to be in this. And for our asset class, obviously, we're focusing on. We do mixed use, but mostly hospitality. So we're focusing on more prime or already developing opportunity zone areas versus some of the other uses. But besides that, it's a micro level decision.
I think the projects need to be well positioned in an opportunity zone. They have to stand on their own already. I think the benefits of being in an opportunity zone are kind of the icing on the cake as far as, in fact, the project needs to be so well positioned and the basis needs to be lower because of these time restraints. I think it creates more challenges taking this type of capital. So you need to identify the voids just like any other development process. These projects need to stand on their own with or without this capital. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion is. Just because it falls in an opportunity zone, it still needs to check all the boxes with respect to being well positioned, identify voids in the trade area. There needs to be demand. It needs to stand on its own. Outside of this,
I would add also, the elephant in the room here is you're talking about, we started this by saying raw land is the best investment. If you go outside of this little world we're in of OZ funds and you try to raise a fund around raw land investments, you will raise zero money unless maybe you're CIM or somebody of that nature. And I come from that background. So we have to remember that, to your point, it's got to stand on its own 2 feet. And we're end cycle. I don't know where we are in the cycle, but if you buy raw land and you don't get to completion, you now have an illiquid asset. We all know what happened to raw land last cycle, which is everybody lost money. So to save your, capital gains, potentially lose it all in the next deal. So be really careful. And what you really want to do is have this be more of an institutional arena for everybody in the room. Either you're a developer, you're a capital provider, or you're a service provider. You want this to be an institutional game, not like the tick structures or some of the issues you had with EB5. Here, you really want these to turn this all on its head and really look at the underlying investment first and underwrite it, and then decide whether
whether you want to take the funds,
whether it fits in those.
As we call it the icing on the cake. The deal pencils, and then you get this added benefit out of it, just like with the way we structure our EB5 deals.
Yeah.
If you get stuck with raw land, though, you can also do this with ground leases. I think that's something that just came out in the second regulations. And if you structure a well-termed ground lease, you can have a lower basis. If there's a hiccup in the economy, you got to be able to hold that asset as raw land to get through the next 2-3 years if you need to. So just because it's an opportunity zone, it just creates stricter timelines. You need to be able to underwrite this just like it's a regular development.
Thank you, gentlemen. Kind of the next topic that we have is deals with the question of acquisitions. I'm going to ask Steve to kind of speak to the ability to combine 1031 and opportunity zones and how to go about analyzing related party rules for people that own the property before December 31, 2017.
Okay. So first up, 1031 and OZ. They're close friends, but they don't really sort of intermarry all that well. I think the best way to think about how to combine them is serially, right? So if you're interested in doing a 1031, you have an asset sale, real estate sale, and you might be doing a 1031, that's great. You already know your clocks, you already know your rules, 45 days, 180 days, etc. But we really can't combine that with an OZ investment because by nature it's different. OZ investment is what? Cash into a fund. And what is a 1031? It's real estate replacement. So the best way to think about it is 1031 goes forward, and if it fails, then you can pick up the gain that came out of the 1031 into a OZ investment. Interesting things, though, start to happen when you actually boil that down. Some of the timing gets kind of wonky. So, for example, when these new regs came out, they told us that real estate that's held, commercial real estate, let's not just call it land investment, but real estate that's improved or leased, when you sell it, it's 1231 gain. When do you have to start your clock for investing there? Well, December 31st. When does your clock start on a 1031? Well, the day of the sale. So that gives you some very odd timing results, right? That you might have a period that you've got 180 days to complete your 1031 and then a halt, a hiatus, Then you start a new one, a new 180-day clock, in December 31st. Working those details out will matter. There's even this kind of weird thing that I was kicking around with Phil beforehand, that some of you guys may know that if you start a 1031 after July 1 and you fail and the cash comes in from the QI in the next year, that you get installment sale reporting. Query whether or not you now have moved all that gain into the next year and that your OZ investment starts then. Interesting stuff. Don't have an answer for that yet. I'm still working that one out like we all are. Let's talk about another sort of key issue on acquisitions. On acquisitions, we're thinking about purchases here, and you got to make sure that the partnership that's buying the property, usually when we're doing real estate, right, we're down on a partnership below the fund, that the partnership and the fund do not have a relationship with the seller. What's that relationship? 20% commonality of ownership. You look at all the owners of the fund, you look at all the owners of the seller, and using a lot of these attribution rules under the tax code, you got to make sure that the seller and the fund or the partnership don't have a 20% common ownership. What happens if you do? It's a bad asset. That's a bad result. Not horrible, but not good. On leases, we don't have a related party test there. These news regs came out. They taught us how to do related party, how to deal with leases, and you can have a lease from a related party. Interesting thing about that is there's some other rules where you do have a related party that is the lessor. You got to watch out for things like prepaid cost and whether or not you have a below fair market value purchase option.
Okay, thank you. Timelines. We've seen a couple of discussions of those, and I'd like to have our panel talk a little bit, and I'll start with, I'm going to pick on Dan because he and I had a conversation about this out in the hallway before our program started, about the relevant timelines from the standpoint of, and again, I think alluding to the more open-ended time frame for ground-up development as opposed to the more closed-end 30-month time frame for existing property with substantial improvements. But look, talk to us a little bit looking at the time requirements that in some respects somewhat constrict the developer's ability to either build or start collecting capital. And how do you look at those things?
To substantially improve it, you have to do it within 30 months. Now, you have to be cognizant of these timelines to protect your investors' tax treatment. So for us, it's really critical on when do you actually accept the capital into your fund, and that gives you a lot more control. So depending on where you are in the development process, if you have an investor that's selling equities, they have a lot more control over that sale than, say, an investor that's selling another asset or selling a business. So those investors work really well for us because we have more control over that sale date. We'd like to accept that capital ideally when we start construction, when you're through the entitlement process, when you've got your zoning, and you've got an 11 to 15 month build time. Give yourself as much leeway as possible in those situations, and try to chart this out so you know when you're taking the capital that you're giving yourself enough room to execute these development plans. It's also important to be working with know your planning department within the municipality that you're developing in. You probably want to have these conversations before you take on this capital to make sure that you've got a cooperating municipality. I know a lot of municipalities now are doing expedited review for they're incentivized to develop these opportunity zones within their municipalities. So to encourage them to offer expedited review on plan review and things like that, every day counts as you can shrink that timeline down when you're dealing with the unknown variables of municipalities and planning and zoning and entitlements. I think those are all things that you want to have conversations about and work into your timeline. You definitely, if you accept this capital, you have to hit these timelines. I think that you got to protect your investors' tax treatment and to give yourself as much room as possible.
The other thing you need to think about is your construction financing. And that commitment could go away in a heartbeat. Yep,
that's another good point. So to have all that teed up before you take this capital is the best bet.
And to add on that, to do that, I think it's important also if you're not using op zone capital and you're bridging it and doing all these costs, you have to find that bridge vehicle, and we've lined it up with our fund so that it's set up almost as a debt structure, so that eventually the QOZ fund that comes in will get credit for all of that because we're financing it with our capital via a debt structure. And I think that's an important element to give the investors, a lot more comfort and certainty, while also giving them credit for all those dollars and not having to put capital gains dollars yourself from your fund into it.
It's almost like replacing equity.
Right.
You're putting you're getting your equity together first. You're going to get your construction financing, and then when you bring in this other additional capital, you're just replacing your own equity with it or a portion of it. But
So your structure, your investors don't take risk until you're ready to break ground.
I wouldn't say ready to break ground. I would say when we've gotten the bank financing lined up, at least on term sheet, we're ready at the approval phase where we're in DDs essentially, and we're still talking to the contractor about the process.
I just want to spend a minute and maybe get some perspective from the panel on the notion that the second set of regulations talk about that to the extent that you go beyond the technical 31-month period, that you're supposed to be spending your money for substantial improvement, and that delay is attributable to some governmental action. That you get an extension for the period of time that you're waiting for that governmental action. But in some respects, I guess when I looked at it, I didn't get a whole lot of comfort from it. First, from the standpoint that one of the requirements was that your application had to be in, and dealing with planning commissions, coastal commission, and California at least, your process is continuous. It's not like you submit one application and you're done. You are submitting new plans, you're issuing new traffic studies, new mitigation studies. It's a continual process.